Listen up, sports fans. Your favorite sportsbook, BetUS.com, is back for our 28th year of NFL action. With the industry's biggest sign-up bonus of up to 200%, BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, NBA, MLB, and more. We've also got hundreds of new casino games, including the coolest new European slots, and our live dealers are waiting for you at the table. Sign up at BetUS.com today to get into the action. BetUS, where the game begins.
And now, broadcasting live from Las Vegas, the Snake Sports Talk Show with Jake Silva starts now.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, and we are in the middle of the week on Wednesday here. Thursday night football tomorrow night. It's going to be a lot of fun, but we've got so much in store for you here on the Snake Sports Talk Show. Wherever and however you may be watching and listening, thanks for making us part of your day. Case joining us here on the show. Well, some interesting news we've already gotten from yesterday, and still more of it to come here tonight. But, I mean, I'm excited for tomorrow. I mean, it's going to be a fun night. And this was one that got flexed in. So in Los Angeles, Broncos, Chargers, Bo Nix, Justin Herbert. Doesn't get any better than that.
That's what really grinds my gears. Like, they got flexed in because they took out the Browns and Bengals primetime games. I think that's one thing that the NFL should leave alone is when a primetime game is scheduled for a specific time or a specific moment, they should leave it alone. And I get that, like, oh, well, nobody wants to see this happen and blah, blah, blah. Like, the Browns have not disappointed on primetime games this year. The Thursday night game versus the Steelers, going up against them, that snow game, everybody loved it. And then the Broncos on the Monday night, it was a shootout going back and forth and back and forth. And, like, everybody enjoyed watching that matchup and was like, damn, this might be the best Monday night game of the year so far. And now you go ahead and you flex them out of Sunday night next week versus the Miami Dolphins, and you put the Commanders and the Falcons in there. Like that? No, come on. Leave the primetime games alone when they're already scheduled for the season.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, playoff implications, it gets cooking this time around. So I'll start with this. So the news just broke out this morning. So the word is in Atlanta, Kirk Cousins in the last few games, 1 touchdown, 9 interceptions, and is now benched. And they're playing the New York Giants this week at home. And this time around, this is week 16, we now are finally going to see Michael Penix start for the Falcons. And you know what? You couldn't have asked for a better time to start a rookie quarterback like Michael Penix. And here's some of the memorable moments you would think of when this comes to mind. Think back to 2018 when the Baltimore Ravens had Joe Flacco, a pocket quarterback. And things kind of seemed like they were doing okay. I still never questioned the Baltimore Ravens defense. I never did, and I probably never will. But remember in that draft, they took Lamar Jackson as the last pick, right? They traded and they ended up getting the last pick in the draft in the first round. And people are kind of going like, what are they doing taking, Lamar Jackson? This is interesting. So you go into the season, Joe Flacco's kind of ups and downs, and then in comes Lamar Jackson, and the rest of the story's history. He came in week 11 of 2018, right? As Chase being my witness, every year when a rookie quarterback comes in, I've always said, Usually, I will sit rookie quarterbacks, and you'll never see them until halfway of the year, which is usually week 8, week 9. And I'm okay with that. You have a bridge quarterback. You're obviously in a rebuild mode. You're not sure if the guy you drafted is a franchise quarterback. So once Lamar Jackson came in, it was a little earlier than Penix. Week 11 was when we first ended up seeing him. And I saw Lamar Jackson as a rookie in Los Angeles, up in Carson. Okay, that was back when the Chargers, they played well with Anthony Lynn and Phillip Rivers, but man, did they give the Chargers, did they give them problems? And that was a Christmas game. But Lamar was something else. He was fun to watch. Now here we are in week 16 in 2024, going into 25, and here it comes good old Michael Penix that people question because of his health, because of his productivity, if that ever is that translating into the NFL level? Well, here's the thing. I'm taking away the injury history from his days in Indiana and in Washington, okay? Because Michael Penix, what is the tangibles? He has such a strong pocket presence for a left-handed quarterback than I think I've ever seen in a long time. When pressure's in his face, he doesn't fold. The other thing is what you also have to look into. The Falcons knew what they were doing. The second they signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year contract, 100 million guaranteed, they knew what they were doing. They were getting their guy for this year, and they got their guy for the future. Okay, that 8th pick had everybody throwing question mark emojis over their heads, myself included. I wasn't sure what this was about. And then people were like, why are the Falcons taking the quarterback at 8th? Well, it's just proving more and more why you would take a quarterback and of this stature. I watched Penix in the preseason. The one game that I think really impressed me was the preseason against the Miami Dolphins. If you recall, there was several plays where he was on a couple snaps and there was pressure in his face. And you know what's funny? I thought with the pocket collapsing as it did, I thought, oh, this is how rookie quarterbacks fold. This is how they get frantic. Not Penix. He still threw a BB right across the field, and it was complete. And that just tells you how much his pocket presence and his self-awareness and everything is just NFL caliber level. Left-handed quarterback. You don't see a ton of those successful left-handed quarterbacks for a very long time. Not since Boomer, not since Ken Stabler, and not since Michael Vick. So it's very rare. We had your shares of Matt Leinart's in the league, but Matt Leinart couldn't translate in the NFL after USC. There's been several of these quarterbacks that have done it. The only outlier, though, that you see right now because of Mike McDaniel is Tua. But we've had question marks on Tua, haven't we? We weren't sure if his development was going to be good in the NFL. And the other thing is because he had a defensive coach in Brian Flores, benched him 5 times in his rookie season with him and Ryan Fitzpatrick. And then once McDaniel came along, he's capable to play in this league. Now we get a chance to see Penix with Raheem Morris and with Zach Robinson. And they're playing the Giants, who last week, Lamar Jackson dropped 5 touchdowns against the Giants. And this is a Giants team who are decimated at quarterback with Tim Boyle there, and it ain't looking good. The Giants are kind of fighting for those top 5 draft pick spots between the Raiders, the Jags, the Patriots, several teams. And so the Giants have an objective. But this is the opportunity, and like what Chase was talking about was the game that got flexed out from the Cleveland Browns. We get the Falcons and the Commanders. And you know what? This is actually a golden opportunity to see both Michael Penix and Jaden Daniels on the same field. So I understand the unfairness of flexing out a game, but you couldn't have asked for a better timing if you're the Atlanta Falcons, because I wanted to see this kid. And for this in particular, them playing against the Giants, mark my words, if Michael Penix throws for 3 touchdowns, no picks, and he's very accurate of the football, because what are the tangibles that the Falcons have? I'm outweighing the pros over the cons. They have a decent offensive line. They have a dual-headed running back system with Bijan and Algier. Darnell Mooney, by the way, since he came on to Atlanta, he's looked like a very good wide receiver. And you have Drake London, you got Kyle Pitts, you got some of these guys that can work, Ray McLeod. You're working with everything that you have in front of you, and you also have a defense that I know has lacked in pass rush, but a secondary with Jesse Bates and a bunch of others. I think this is interesting to watch the Atlanta Falcons. And you know what? Time was on the essence right now for the Falcons, because 3 games left of the season, and you've got Tampa climbing in and trying to take the division. And the Falcons have an opportunity to make it right. If Penix comes in, 3 touchdowns, no picks, accurate, boy, I'm going to love watching the primetime game with Penix in here, because we've seen a bunch of these rookie quarterbacks. We've seen Bo Nix. We've seen Caleb Williams. We've seen Jaden Daniels. We've seen Drake May. I'm just as excited now to watch Michael Penix with this offense. And this is where it's a 2-part segment. I'll get to Kirk Cousins after this. But if Penix really works, this is now what's shifting me into this. There's going to be a market for Kirk Cousins. And make no mistake of this. So Jeremy Fowler, who ended up posting this up, there were several destinations for Kirk Cousins, because what it sounds like is because of financial reasons, there could be a chance the Falcons do what the Denver Broncos did with Russell Wilson. They may cut him and get out of this deal and have to deal with the dead cap. There's a very good chance that the Falcons can do that. And the other thing is, what's going to happen is Kirk Cousins, he's still going to get his guaranteed money. But what happened to the Denver Broncos this year compared to the last 2 seasons with Russ? And that's on top of the dead cap hit. They got better, and they found their franchise quarterback in Bo Nix. The dead cap is what it is. But what are the things that they're doing right? Well, we got Pat Surtain, we got Riley Moss, we got a defense with Nick Benito, we got an offensive line that we extended Garrett Bowles. And the only problems that they're running into is outside of Cortland Sutton and I would say a serviceable Marvin Mims. They just got to get a little bit more talent on the receiving core. But the other thing is, they need to figure out their run game, because it's a running back by committee, and it's so inconsistent. It's like every single snap, I'm either getting Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, Audric Estime. I'm getting so many different running backs, and there's no efficiency. There's no consistency with Denver. But the outlier is Bo Nix, and that's Sean Payton's guy. The second Bo came into the league out of Oregon, Sean Payton has had nothing but positive praise for his young quarterback. Now, with the Falcons, they can be in dead cap, but what are the things that they do have? Outside of a shaky pass rush, I've got a secondary that's very solid. I've got a defensive front that eventually is going to need some help, especially with Grady Jarrett getting up there in age. The other thing is I have a decent offensive line. Chris Lindstrom, several others. I've got 2 really good running backs I like. I got wide receiving core that I think can be a little bit better, but Darnell Mooney's popping. And so just like Denver, Atlanta will kind of find themselves in this position where they'll be in the dead cap. But that's not going to matter if you got the franchise quarterback here with Michael Penix. Because in the end, most people that see this, and Chase understands this too, when you find a franchise quarterback, which 65% of the league miss on, it happens. Quarterback is the hardest position to find. But when you do, like when you find a Mahomes, an Allen, a Burrow, a Herbert, a Lamar, everything else can be simplified. Offensive line you can build around, run game, wide receiver, defense. Everything else can now be simplified as long as you have the right coach, the right quarterback, and I would say the right system and schemes. So I'm excited to watch Michael Penix, but Kirk Cousins, he'll have a market if, in fact, he is cut. And that's what it sounds like. But the market is Tennessee, after benching Will Levis, will probably look for a quarterback. The Giants are needing a quarterback. And you know what? This might shock a lot of people, but Kyle Shanahan has had nothing but high praises for Kirk Cousins. I could see the 49ers making a move for Kirk Cousins. And it's nothing against Brock Purdy, but that is something that's been a rumor buzz. And then there's Washington, but I don't see that happening now that Jaden Daniels is there. So Kirk will have a market on top of Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones probably, but he's more of a backup. But there is a market for some of these quarterbacks that do need one. So either one of these, and like I talked about early on, I talked about the Sam Darnold deal with the New York Giants, and I think it's interesting. But keep in mind of that. But these teams that go through a heavy dead cap, you know what's funny is when you find your franchise quarterback and they make the playoffs, like what's happening right now with Denver, with Bo Nix, they're not going to care. It's not going to matter with them because they're winning the games that they should. They're efficient on offense. And even with the entire structure of the roster from top to bottom is getting better. So let's see. But I think it's interesting. I'm telling you, once the news broke out, Chase, I mean, I was talking about this early on before the season started. There's a reason why the Penix was taken. And right now, Kirk Cousins, and look, I like the guy, but he's getting old really fast after
36.
36 years old, going to be 37 next year in August. And there is a market for teams that either need a quarterback to start because of two things. One, they either are thin in the quarterback room, or two, they're needing a quarterback that could potentially be a bridge for the next one stepping in. And I know it shocks a lot of people, but San Francisco, Kyle Shanahan, I mean, since the days in Washington, he's talked about Kirk Cousins, would love to have him in his system again. I would see this as kind of similar like when Matt Ryan in Atlanta, when they both were there. And I think that could work for Kirk Cousins, but there's going to be a market. And like I talked about with Sam Darnold, now I will still probably take Sam Darnold over Kirk Cousins for age reason and probably for productivity with the Giants. Because you got to ask yourself, do you find your franchise quarterback in this draft, or does next year, since the quarterback class will be bigger and it'll be a lot better, there will be more talent, do you maybe wait until then? That's the question mark you should be asking yourself. But Penix season, man, I'm excited about it, but Kirk Cousins, he'll have a market somewhere.
I mean, I don't think that anybody's going to bring him in as a starter because, 37 years old, and the fact that his arm strength, like you don't see much zip on the ball anymore. You don't see the pop. You don't see the accuracy like you did. And I think the Achilles injury really took a toll on his body. But like you're going to have another Aaron Rodgers situation where, he goes to a team, he's like 37 and he's reaching the final like years of his career. And he's not going to be performing at a high level. That's why the Rams are looking at trying to potentially draft a replacement for Matthew Stafford, because Stafford is getting up there in age. He's been injury riddled and he's played through a lot of injuries. And like, I think he's like 37 right now, going to be 38.
Yeah.
Like, you've got 1, maybe 2 good years left with Matthew Stafford. And I could either see them going, picking up Will Levis, like I mentioned yesterday, and like Stafford grooming him, or the option number 2 is in the second round of this year's draft, they pick up Jalen Milroe, let him sit, let him develop, and make sure he's that guy that you want moving forward, because now that gives McVay the option to use his legs along with the arm that he wants. So like Kirk Cousins, if he goes anywhere, he'll be a backup. maybe a bridge quarterback, just depending on how, put together the team is. But I'm with you. I see Sam Darnold having a higher market because he's 26 years old.
Yep. And
26, and he's been in the league for like almost 6-7 years.
Look at the resurgence he's having in Minnesota.
And he got drafted in 2018, almost at 19 years old. He had just turned 20 when he got drafted, and that was insane.
Yeah, and the thing is, the growth spurt of it is because he's been through two dysfunctional organizations between the Jets and Panthers. But and he's only had 1 year under Kyle Shanahan as a backup, but then goes to Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, and the job that they're doing right now is well worth the money.
He deserves Coach of the Year.
I agree. And there's even, because again, there are several other coaches that I would consider, but Kevin O'Connell, man, the job he's done it's fascinating. It's incredible.
Yeah. And if he can get this production out of JJ when he comes back off of his injury, because you don't draft a guy with the 11th overall pick to sit him and you say, no, you're not going to be the starter and everything. We are going to go with Darnold for the future and everything. Like, yeah, JJ's only 3 years younger. But you drafted him for a reason. You drafted him to be that guy for the future. Yeah. And if him setting for the full year because of the injury has helped him learn and develop better, then that's fantastic. But I do think that Kevin O'Connell's got that way with quarterbacks to get the best out of them, because we have seen some of the best years of Kirk Cousins' career under Kevin O'Connell.
So, by the way, I just looked at the Giants-Falcons odds. Falcons are favored by 8.5. If Kirk was still starting, I would have taken the Giants to cover, because with the way that the performance has been. But now with Penix in, and I just watched Lamar Jackson drop 5 TDs against the Giants last week. I'm telling you, man, I think Penix season is going to be so fascinating. And look, I understand the frustration with the flex out, but if you're the Falcons, you couldn't have never asked for a better timing than this. Because the fact of, let's say he really does produce this week, and then you go into prime time with Jaden Daniels, the number 2 quarterback, and then Penix, the 4th quarterback taken off this draft board. That's a hell of a market there, if you ask me.
And then you've got the Bucs, the last game of the season, for division implications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's the thing is like I told everybody is, why would you not want to start Penix? Because right now Kirk's just not doing it, and you would be now. What I think what could happen is, if Penix is a hit, do you really want to be that financial liable team there when you have Kirk under contract? I don't think so. And this is the one thing that I think has benefited Denver to an extent, because Nick Bonito and that defense looks so good right now. Vance Joseph's done a very good job. The offensive line now actually looks pretty good outside of the inconsistent run game that I can't figure out, but hopefully they can fix that. And then at the same time, Bo Nix is just, he's really saving a lot of people's jobs in Denver. And it's making everybody just not even talk about the dead cap anymore. And what's funny is teams that do have cap hits, oftentimes when they move off of some of these dumb moves, of dumb signings and trades, actually benefit a lot better. And that's why I'm like, I give kudos to Denver with what they've done. And I think what Bo Nix is doing is really giving the legitimate case that, look, I'll eat the dead cap, but I've got a franchise quarterback I can build around. I got a decent O-line. I got a really good run game with both Bijan and Algier. I got a receiving core I can maybe make a little better, but Darnell Mooney's great. I mean, I've watched Darnell Mooney come out of Chicago and come into Atlanta, and he's better. So, and outside of pass rush, that defense is not terrible, but I've seen some of its inconsistencies that I think they need to fix. I don't think that's terrible. I think this is a good thing for Atlanta.
Yep. I agree.
Good stuff. We got a lot to talk about. So last night, coming up after the break. We had the Emirates Cup, and Milwaukee won it. And there's going to be more to talk about with the NBA because last night we put the NBA on blast. And the Emirates Cup, I do find it have its successes, but there's still more that's what needs to be done. And I'll explain about that a little bit more. Plus, later on, bottom half of the hour, Chase and I, we're on round 2 now of our top 10 picks right now. And so we're going to get an idea because once the draft starts to really set itself by week 18 at the end of the season, we'll have our final top 10 from there before we go into the offseason, and we'll have our full 32 slate. Because that's going to be a lot of fun. And I will tell you what, there are teams out there that because of all this movement, I'm getting closer to figuring out what they really need in this draft.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the way that we should do it, we should not do it like we did last time where we both took turns doing it. I think what we should do is we should go opposite picks. Like you do the first pick, I do the second. You do the third, I do the fourth. Because not only does that give us different opinions on what the picks would be or like what we think that they would be, it gives us a better understanding of like how these GMs would actually sit there and think.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, because you'll have the even picks from 2 to 10, and then I've got the odds from 1 to 9, and you know that the 7th pick is Cleveland right now.
I do.
So you're going to be pretty interested of what I have in store for Cleveland with this one. But
there's multiple routes you can go with that I would not be upset with because at this point in time, you know, outside of Ward and Sanders, there's not really another quarterback worth taking in the first round. So
not at all. And you know what? You're better to be patient, and you're better to really build this up right. And you know, there's multitudes of things that do need to be fixed, but that's going to be fun coming up here. Well, guys, like we keep talking about, by the time we hit the 20s, we're closer to Christmas. And the beautiful Christmas gift that keeps on giving is getting the tickets to the best seats in the house, whatever you decide in your interest, what you want from going to the big game. I know with the Thursday night game, people in LA, I mean, SoFi Stadium's beautiful. I've yet to visit it, but Broncos, Chargers, there's tickets for that. There's tickets for your favorite artist at your favorite concert venue. I mean, Red Rock's out here in Denver. It's always such a fun place to go to for your first time. Or comedy shows. I like those. And I even like some art shows wherever it may be. SeatGeek is the #1 most trusted ticketing app for your next event. And see why. By going online or downloading it on your mobile device or Google Play in the App Store. They give you the best prices of tickets, the most affordable prices, and the best seats in the house to enjoy the experience for yourself before checkout. This is my gift to you during the holiday season. Please use promo code SNAKESPORTS for $20 off of your purchase of your first ticket right before checkout. SeatGeek.com, download your mobile device, Google Play in the App Store, and online. Promo code SNAKESPORTS for $20 off.
Looking for a show with the best takes and opinions? Want a show with the best coverage around the world of sports? Jam-packed with an all-star interview lineup? Then the best place to find it all, sports and entertainment, is right here. Join Jake Silva on the Snake Sports Talk Show, presented by SeatGeek and BetUS. Weeknights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific on Sports Wave Network.
Snake Sports Talk Show is sponsored by Muscle Tech, with hundreds of supplements and vitamins to choose from, all packed with 100% all-natural proven ingredients. You can be sure that Muscle Tech will give you the edge and the boost to train and look like your fit and healthy best, whatever your goals are. Try Muscle Tech today and use promo code SNAKESPORTS to save 30% off your purchases.
So I put the NBA on blast last night. And last night we had the Emirates in-season tournament cup, and the Milwaukee Bucks won last night. So here's the thing. I'm not knocking on, both those teams at all between Milwaukee and Oklahoma City, but you saw like who was the better team at the end of the night. It was Giannis and it was Milwaukee. And so, but my problem is, like I've been talking with a lot of people, and I've had to hear this out from so many different basketball fans left and right. They are disappointed in the NBA because ratings since 2012 have dropped to 48%. And this year it's dropped another 26%. That's unacceptable. But a lot of that is because players are being too catered to the load management thing. At the same time, Adam Silver's not a guy that, I'll be honest with you, puts his foot down on some of this stuff. And you know what's funny about it is I'm not hearing only just the bitterness from you dearly, the fans. I'm watching the bitterness on the most talented people with as far as their standpoints in basketball on TNT. I'm watching Charles Barkley. I'm watching all these guys, and they are negative. That's not a good look for the NBA. And that's because they're putting a lot of players on blast. Oh, and by the way, supposedly, Kawhi Leonard's supposed to come back for the Clippers. Yeah, we'll see how that works. He's been missing 8 months. I don't know what the Clippers and Steve Ballmer are really thinking with really investing in both him and James Harden. I think, I think the Clippers could do better. But when you are investing that much on Kawhi Leonard, who's literally been out for 8 months and now he's finally coming back to the court. I mean, and I'm watching Denver. I'm watching several other teams actually play and perform better in the Western Conference. Please. But I think a lot of it is just the player movements. You know what's crazy about this is people complained about super teams and player movements, which I'm all about player mobility. But the problem is that these super teams actually don't last. I mean, the Warriors with Kevin Durant was a couple of years. They won titles, probably could have won one more out of the two they won, but they didn't last that long. They moved off. The Miami Heat with D. Wade, LeBron, and Chris Bosh, that was a couple of years. They won a couple titles until that eventually got moved. So the super teams portion is not the problem with the NBA now, and I don't think it will be at this point. But I've watched the NBA from the 90s, 2000s, and all the way up to this point. And I can guarantee you this version of the NBA, I ain't liking it. And it's not because we do not have the talents right now, but a lot of it is because it's international players. You just watch Giannis literally make SGA and the entire young OKC team look so marginalized because what does Milwaukee do? They get defensive. Now, I do have reservations of the Bucks because of coaching schematics, how they really set the tone on the floor. Okay, that's my big problem. But it's funny because it then tells me, and I've heard actually one really good source, and I believe it, is I think they should end up pursuing Herb Jones because that gives you extra defense, that gives you a facilitator on the floor with passing and then not to mention taking the shots. But a lot of this in the NBA, there's not enough attackers on the perimeter. There's not. This game used to be your best shots were closest to the rim, not further out. So every time when I watch them shoot 44% of threes, it's terrible. They don't play. And what do you expect them to play defense if they're playing so far back and it's the be-all, end-all? That's not how you're going to win games. I understand the outlier is Steph Curry, but that's not what's going to win NBA championships. The championships, believe it or not, is you have a superstar, another star that acts like a two, like a Robin, and you have an entire roster from top to bottom, your starting five to the bench that either facilitate offensively or defensively. Defensively, I've got perimeter defenders. I got guys that give me second chance shots or rebounds. And I've actually got specialists on the three, whether if I got a guy that sits up on the wing, takes the three right up from there, I'm going to trust him. He's just going to be there to be my facilitating shooter. But the rest of it, I got to have my best starting five out there. But I'd rather be, and like Chase and I talked about when it comes to the fluidity of offense in the NFL today, the running backs are back. When you have a solid run game and you've got a very good, healthy offensive line and the franchise quarterback, this game's not solely based upon wide receivers. It's not, and I don't think it ever will be, but they are the icing on the cake that makes the offense just balanced. They are. So it's a similar kind of route with the NBA. You've got your stars, you've got your coach, but you mostly want your perimeter attackers and defenders. Sure, they can occasionally shoot the three-pointers, but that's not your be-all, end-all. That's going to win you championships. Look, I like the in-season tournament because it's fun, it's creative, and I think it does give you some generated views. Why? Because it's in Las Vegas. And Vegas, why not? Why would people not want to come to Vegas for a tournament like that? I mean, it's just money marketing. So I can understand that. But if I don't have enough of the domestic talents on top of the international talents we have right now that are taking over this league, this sport, this league is not going to sustain itself, especially when you've got the NFL, who's just literally blowing everybody out on viewerships, on matchups, on talents from college. That's where Adam Silver really needs to get on the same page. But you know what? Congrats to the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis is just showing you why he's a superstar. But this kind of stuff is why you have to produce the best and the right talents out of college basketball. Get on the same pages like what the NFL does with college football. Chase of the news.
This is the Hot Press.
I mean, it was fun. I'll say that. Yeah. But there's a multitude of things that just need to be fixed. And I don't know. It's up to Adam Silver if he wants to fix this. But
yeah,
like I mean, they got the NFL has such a great relationship with college football because they're producing talents that are ready to play by day one. Like, I know who my star talent that's going to make the 53-man roster. And then I know by the later rounds, my guys that are added depth pieces or their practice squad guys. But that's what makes the NFL so unique. That's why the NBA, with their relationship with college basketball, it's like there's so much hidden resentment with them. I don't get it. But it's like the NIL, when you're paying these college players to be there in college. I mean, look at Steph Curry, Draymond, and Clay. What do they have in common? They spent 3 years in college until they were ready for the pros. I want to see more of them because if you give them more longevity in college to develop their talent, I'm not saying these kids can't play, but what we're seeing right now, it's taking a 4 to 5 year project with some of these young kids until they become household names. I would rather than be projects in the college basketball realm for 2-3 years, go into the NBA draft, and in the NBA, it gets more exciting. I now have developed talent, domestic talent, really, in this league that once LeBron is retired, and not only will I have Anthony Edwards, but then I'll have a multitude of guys that are ready to play. They're ready to showcase their stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, so we have seen a couple quarterbacks kind of come out and say that they are foregoing the 2025 NFL draft and going back to college. Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier. We've also got a ton of transfer portal quarterbacks that are looking to find new teams. Recent news came out that Bill Belichick is trying to poach one of the quarterbacks from Texas, either Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning. Now, here's the thing. Quinn Ewers, I can see because, what better way to boost your draft stock than to go with a guy like Bill Belichick who has helped, mold players into the right, way that they're supposed to play. I could see Arch sticking with Texas, not only because, one, it's one of the bigger name schools. Two, they've got a lot of upcoming stars that are coming in terms of receiver, O-line, and D-line. But not only that, you've got a guy in Steve Sarkisian who has coached in the NFL and can therefore, help develop him into the quarterback that he needs to be next year. So
it was funny. So the former Ohio State Buckeye legendary coach, Urban Meyer, because they were talking about this on the herd earlier, and I was listening to it, and they were talking about both Steve Sarkisian and with Ryan Day. Ryan Day's separate subject. But when it came to Steve Sarkisian, the thing that we can't seem to figure out, because Texas is such a loaded roster from both offense and defense, but what's happened with the offense? It's like it gets to a point where when they blow a lot of these teams out, right, they actually look like a damn good football team. And I've watched it from both Quinn Ewers and with Arch Manning. But then it's like they get to these weird spurts that it's like the offense just disappeared. And then they have to lean solely on the defense. So I don't know. But you know what, though? I can understand that with Quinn Ewers for sure. Okay, because it seems to me if Texas does this right, now this is where too, this is the rippling effect of the NIL. Okay, because Bill Belichick, but what's different about this is, and I think Urban Meyer said it best as a legendary coach. It used to be the days where you used to have to put together a letter or a text message, and you went out and you spoke to a lot of these kids, even with recruiting, right? But now the deal is now with the NIL, you call up these players and then you speak to their agents and they're like, where can we get a deal done? If Texas, if they're smart about this, your hope is you lock in Arch Manning. Because if you don't, I think North Carolina could be sneaky with that NIL money because they're going to get some of that, and maybe they might actually have a deal for Arch.
I mean, they just stole the number one O-lineman in the portal right now.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So usually it does make an effect with such big names that are coming into the college football realm. And Dion spoke about this and says this may be successful, but I mean, people are kind of mixed emotions with Bill Belichick. But the understanding of it is, I mean, I'm watching right here in Colorado where I live at with Dion and what he's doing there with as far as the region and the culture in Colorado, in Boulder. Whereas when I look at Chapel Hill with Bill Belichick, and you know how the East Coast was with him. He was sleeveless hoodies, hoodie down. That was the culture. That was his persona. So I think this will be interesting, but if we get more resources on this, I'm telling you, I think Texas, they're going to regret that if they do not lock up Arch. It's one thing for Quinn, but when you talk about Arch Manning with this offense, and I get it, they got Isaiah Bond, and right now, because you got both Zechariah and Zion Branch, who are in the transfer portal. Could you imagine that? The sweetened deal is you get him an NIL deal that locks him in, and you give him more weapons that will then make Texas still competitive in the SEC. That may be.
I mean, here's the thing you also got to look at. If Arch Manning does go to North Carolina, how many decommits are you going to have from Texas going to North Carolina?
Man.
You're going to have so many of them. It's going to be crazy.
And it'll be worse if it's defensive players who swap. That's going to be, I don't know how Sark's going to do that. But
Belichick with the defense. Holy shit.
That's what I'm saying. That'd be crazy.
So you, like a lot of people have been questioning whether or not this 12-team playoff is actually worth it in the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
Well, now we are going to get to see people that we normally don't get to see like for scouting purposes. Like, for example, a guy that could boost his draft stock that I looked up the stats today, and I did not realize with a smaller, like, non-competitive school, even though it is in the Big Ten, it hasn't been competitive for years. I looked up the stats of this guy, and they were really good, and that is Curtis Rourke out of Indiana.
Yeah.
This is a good chance for guys like Curtis Rourke, Cam Scattaboo, and a couple guys from SMU to make a name for themselves and show these scouts in the NFL, this is what this player can do for you.
Man, South Bend. So this game, the line right now, it's favored to Notre Dame by 7. And this is in South Bend, Indiana. And that weather, it's going to be a bit cloudy and it's going to be cold. It's going to be 27 in South Bend. And they're not that far away from each other. So that's where I'm like, this will be interesting because it's a test to Indiana. But then at the same time, Marcus Freeman and what he's done in Notre Dame with that defense. I mean, yeah, they had an embarrassing loss to NIU. But at the same time, it's really going to show how legit Notre Dame really is. Because remember, they haven't played a ton of opponents. So it's like, it's one thing you're playing Indiana, but it's another when you play a Georgia, an Oregon, or any one of those teams there. So, but I'll tell you what, though, the odds with as far as hoisting the college football championship, the largest one is Boise stands at 6,500. So that's the largest one. And then I think the favorite was Oregon. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And this weekend, man, we're getting some really good games. I'm getting South Bend. That looks really competitive. And, I got SMU, Penn State, Tennessee, Ohio State right after. This weekend's going to be nuts. And I know we got NFL right afterward, but I think that's what's going to be nice. And it's 4 straight weeks now, right? So this is what's different. There's 4 straight weeks of this. So you got Friday, Saturday, and then depending on where the bracket falls from there, it's just going to get better and better. But I know them boys in Ohio State, they can't afford to lose that game. At Tennessee, this is a testament to Nico as a freshman of how he deals with that kind of pressure. But you're Ohio State. You got an overpowering running game. You got Jeremiah Smith, and you got a bunch of other really good ones. You cannot afford to lose.
Nico's a sophomore.
Yeah. So, no, he's a freshman.
Is he?
Yeah, he is.
I thought he came out in the same class that Arch did because Arch is a sophomore this year.
He actually redshirted, so that's the reason. So that's the one thing about Nico, which I think Nico's going to have a pretty good track record, but in a setting like this, which is the inaugural 12-team playoff, that's going to be humongous. And listen, the ratings, I cannot wait to see what the ratings will be at the end of this thing.
I know, it's going to be insane.
It's going to be fun.
Now, there's a little bit more of an update on Roger Goodell's plan to expand the NFL and to make it into a 36-team league. Because a couple years ago, we had seen that he wants to expand and make some NFL teams more international. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were speculating on how that would even be possible. Well, number one, the way that, here's what I read and the way that they were thinking about doing it. Number one option, make it 18 games, give you 2 bye weeks and everything. And then I know that people were asking about the jet lag because this was the major thing. Yep. You put 4 teams in a division and make them the international teams. And their plan was to take a team, let's say the AFC South. You fly that entire division over to or to London or something. Each week, they stay there for 4 weeks. Each week, they play a new team in that division, and then they fly back together as the same, as a division, and then another division would go over there and stay there for 4 weeks and play these division opponents and everything. Yeah, that's their plan on how that they would, make it to where you don't have to keep going back and forth constantly.
Well, that has been kind of the challenge, is the jet lag and the time constraint. That's the one thing that is the talking issue right now with the NFL. To me personally, I wouldn't do it. I understand that, like, we have games internationally, like with Sao Paulo and Munich and London, but look, man, I just think if you take the game internationally, I get it for international purposes, but I just am not sure with this. I just think it's going to be much more complicating than we think. I mean, I get it. They're trying to find solutions, but I just don't, I don't know.
How would the draft work? Like,
that's what I'm saying. The draft, all this stuff. So that means these kids in college, right? I mean, I don't know how Notre Dame is because they get a lot of their international money because of the Catholics. But here's the thing: is I don't know how some of these college kids in the nation are going to feel like when they have to play internationally. I don't know. I feel like it's going to be a mess. And that's why I'm like, look, the product is good. And I understand, like, the traveling part, because here's the part.
And the ratings,
the traveling and the ratings, because here's the thing. Major League Baseball, it's fun because they got the London, the Mexico series. They're probably going to play a couple more other places. And here's the thing. We're going to watch the baseball game next year between the Reds and Braves when they're at Bristol on a racing track. So that's going to be, so you know what I mean? It's like the promotions are fine. But I just feel like if you're going to try to implement this league into an international one, that I don't know. I feel like Roger may be getting a little too ahead of himself when it comes to that.
I agree. And I think that if you're going to expand and you want to add more teams into the NFL, put them in places where you've already seen some NFL teams come from. Like, you have seen some from St. Louis and everything. And granted, that didn't work out twice. But you give it to a guy that can maybe push the issue, and then you might see some success.
Got to give it to the right owners.
Got to give it to the right owners, exactly. And then there's been talks that Orlando has been wanting to get sports teams, whether it's, a baseball team, because they had renderings of a baseball stadium that they would have down there and how much fun it would be. But they've also been talking about that they want to get a football team down in Orlando to bring a lot more tourists from the games, going to Disney World, going back to there the next day, more of a touristy attraction.
Now,
you've been seeing Salt Lake City as a destination for, people have been coming out and saying, make them the Salt Lake City Vipers.
I mean, here's the problem, though, with the Florida thing, because I feel like if you put a team up in Orlando, that's a cesspool of teams now. Because Tampa, Jacksonville, Miami, and then Orlando, it's like, what? Are you going to make a division strictly Floridians? Is that what's going to happen? Like, I don't know. But I will say, though, Salt Lake City is interesting. St. Louis, to me, I feel like you got to revive that back, because I watched the St. Louis Battlehawks, and that team, it generates a crowd. It generates a fan base. They're football fans. So it's like it would do righteousness to giving them a football team again. But the Salt Lake City one's interesting because right now, I mean, hopefully next year they'll figure out a name, but that hockey team, now that they have it, and they have an owner who really is invested in the team, and I like them. They're techie guys, but they invest in both this team and the Jazz, and it's fun being up over there in Salt Lake. So yeah,
it's definitely interesting. I mean, there's also multiple different places. Like, I know that people don't want to hear this, but like, if you can get a guy in there that is willing to spend the money rather than the city, because I know the city doesn't want to, but an owner that is willing to put some money out, you could see Oakland be revitalized, as a football team, because the city of Oakland, now that they have no sports team, they could want to. Maybe even down in San Diego. Like, if you got 5 baseball teams in the state of California, you could definitely have one, or like another team in that city, in that state and everything, and they wouldn't bat an eye. There's multiple different places where they are thinking about expanding. I even heard the Dakotas as an opportunity for a football team and everything. Like, it really just depends. I know Roger Goodell is kind of like, listening to offers, calling some people up, figuring out what they want to do, if they would want to do it. And that would expand the NFL draft to 9 rounds instead of, 7. So
it's a fun idea, but that's where with breaking it down carefully, this is where I think it's a step-by-step plan. I mean, you got to think about it. Regions and like the financial purposes. It's going to be interesting. All right, Chase with the news.
This is the hot press.
Chase and I last time, we did our top 10 picks.
Yes,
now
sir.
We're doing it again for part 2, and this is fun. So Chase will have the evens. I got the odds. So
let's go. We got this.
Yeah, we do. Here we go from here. All right. So with the number 1 pick for the Las Vegas Raiders, it's clearly obvious, and I know that that's a hefty pick, but I am going to go with Shedeur Sanders. It just makes a lot of sense to me because the Raiders will have more money in the cap. They could go buy an offensive line and address depth pieces and maybe some weapons. But when you get a franchise quarterback, and let's say this hits, Chase, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, and Shedeur Sanders,
Woo.
I mean, talented quarterbacks all in the AFC West. But the thing is, too, the question mark is Antonio Pierce's job. Now, that's another one. Now, if that does happen and you get the right coach in this building, oh, my God. The level of talent and coaching competitiveness is going to be through the roof. Like, that's going to be insane.
Yeah, it definitely will be. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people looking at pick number 2, like, oh, are the Giants actually going to choose a quarterback? They could go tackle. They could go wide receiver. They could, they could try to build that position to, maybe wait until the second round and get a guy like Ewers or Milroe if Ewers decides to go out.
Yeah.
But I think that in this point in time, you're going to look at the free agents that they got. They've got Cam Robinson. They've got Joe Noboom. They've got Ronnie Stanley, Tyron Smith, all available offensive line, all available tackles in free agency that they could go after. I think your safe and easy pick right here is Cam Ward.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's the thing is because Cam Ward, if he is as talented as many people have said that he is, and that's actually a pretty good point. I mean, you do have a lot of those offensive linemen and tackles that you can go and get one in free agency. That's not a bad idea. I like that thought. Now, New England, here's the thing about them. I know that because they're kind of stuck between the two. But I mean, Travis Hunter, I mean, you're not going to pass the guy up, but here's why I think it'll be interesting to me to draft Travis Hunter is because I'm going to watch Drake May, okay? And I think he is the real deal as your franchise quarterback. Now, the other thing is you won't have just one, you'll have 2 shutdown corners between Christian Gonzalez and Travis Hunter. Now, the other thing is and New England's in the same position too. They could go buy a receiver. Let's say they go and they get T. Higgins, right? Because if Drake May's hit, and I mean, there's a multitude of things they do have to fix. Offensive line, I'd say there's some interior defenses they may have to fix, but they need wide receivers for sure. But I mean, I was kind of stuck in between this and Teteroa McMillan. But again, my point might change in our finalized top 10 before we then go into the offseason and we have the full 21. So I'll take Travis Hunter as one of the best picks, honestly. I mean, you're going to go for the best athlete at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, for the Patriots, you could go multiple different ways. I mean, like you said, there's Stephon Diggs, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson. So many options available at wide receiver that you can go with. for the Patriots and everything. So getting a guy like Shador to shore up that defense and maybe even be the gadget weapon that you need for Drake May would also be fantastic. So I could definitely see that.
Yep.
Right here, it's kind of almost a no-brainer. You got to go with Will Johnson. Will Johnson was arguably the best corner in college football. And the reason why he didn't win the award is because he was injured for like half the season. But like he's played a lot more stiff competition than what Travis Hunter has in terms of guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. And, those are just a few names to say the least. So, and he has shut them down every chance he's getting. So
yeah, and the one thing that they lack is the secondary. They lack the secondary. I think they do got to fix the offensive line. And I think and here's the other thing. They can trade away Travis Etienne to go and acquire draft capital because it seems to me that Tank Bigsby is looking to be their guy next year. So I'm going to get draft capital and I'm going to fill in those spots. But I think you're right. Will Johnson, it's just too good to pass up from here. I think you got to get the best corner. Now, the Carolina Panthers, they traded away Brian Burns, right? And where the pass rush didn't look as good, and you got to help out Derek Brown. I think they take Abdul Carter. I just think it makes too much sense to me. The kid is physical, and I've watched a lot of these pass rushers from Penn State. Micah Parsons, Chop Robinson, and now Abdul Carter. I think it does make Carolina competitive on defense, but this is also something that they need. Another team that has a multitude of issues. I would take Abdul Carter, their best pass rusher, after they lost Brian Burns in this last offseason.
Yeah, next up is Tennessee, and I love the pick with Abdul Carter. I mean, you can't go wrong with him. You can't go wrong with James Pierce, whichever one turns out to be the best pass rusher by the end of the day. Either of those two would be a phenomenal pick to choose. Moving on to Tennessee, though, like there's multiple options you can go with. You can go with receiver, offensive line, D-line, whatever it may be. But you are looking at, C.J. Latham, the tackle that they just drafted. You got Peter Skoronski playing right tackle. And then you look at the free agents. Zach Martin's a free agent for guard. Ryan Kelly is a free agent for center. You got Austin Corbett, James Daniels, and just a whole bunch of other guys that are available for guards like Kevin Zeitler that the Titans can go pick up with that interior line. And with Bill Callahan being that O-line coach, I think that those would be great fits. So at this point in time, you don't see I can see them going with a guy like Jalen Milroe, maybe taking the shot and the chance. But like he is a developmental piece. He is not worth a first-round pick, in my opinion. Yeah. I'm going with Teteroa McMillan for this choice.
I agree with that because here's the thing. Treylon Burks, after you traded away A.J. Brown, he is so close to being cut on this roster, and he did not pan out. I mean, he clearly was he was so underwhelmed, and it's not good. So I think Teteroa McMillan really does give you the best chances, and especially if you're going into the quarterback market, and let's say you add in a Kirk Cousins or a Sam Darnold, you've already got Calvin Ridley, who you're trying to work, Teteroa McMillan, and Tyler Boyd. Yes, you could make this work. So, and they've already addressed the tackles. So I think you could get an interior guy, but I think most importantly, you're going to need to have that complementary piece there. Now, on to the Cleveland Browns. They have so many options from here. But I think, to me personally, because I just think right now the quarterback thing is going to be a little bit interesting. But they have a multitude of stuff that they do need to end up fixing up. As far as defense goes, they could get a few, but I think, in my opinion, I wouldn't be shocked if this was the case. But I can potentially see them getting Mason Graham. The reason of this is because they've already traded away one of their interior D-line, one of their edge rushers. And the thing is you're only going to have Myles Garrett for as long as you possibly can. But you are going to need a sidekick in that D-line to really solidify who they are. And so I think because Cleveland, I would never take that defense for granted with their build, but I just think Mason Graham. Now, They could go other options maybe a little bit later on, but that's where I kind of have them right now. Take the best interior D line in the country in Mason Graham.
No, I love the pick. I've been choosing between him or Calvin Banks because I know that we need O-line help. But again, this is a very offensive line heavy. And, you could see them last until the mid to late first round with a lot of these guys. And, you got guys like Josh Simmons, who tore his ACL, who could fall down the draft boards on a lot of people. And he was, on pace to be maybe surpassing Will Campbell and Calvin Banks to be the number one tackle taken. And, I keep telling people we get gashed in the run game so badly that we need to plug up that middle. Yeah. And Michael Hall Jr. was a pick that we picked last year for a guy that can get after the quarterback, but we don't have that run stuffer. Getting Mason Graham to plug up that middle hole, phenomenal pick, and I love it. And you could go in the second round and get your offensive tackle that you really need if you really want one that badly. Mm-hmm. Moving on to the New York Jets. This is tough right here. This is where it gets tricky in the draft and where now that Joe Douglas is gone, yep. a guy who has picked phenomenally in the draft, and
he had a bunch of hits.
He had a bunch of hits. And the fact that you fired him, it's absolutely insane. They've already discussed they're not signing Aaron Rodgers back to the 2025 season. So more than likely, they're going to go with Tyrod Taylor. Mm-hmm. And this defense has looked great. The offensive line could use work. But I'm going to go with the sneaky pick more than anybody else. And I'm going to go with Jalen Milroe right here.
Wow. Okay.
Jalen Milroe to the New York Jets. Because I know that, in my opinion, I don't think that he's worth a first-round talent. I don't think that he is good enough to be drafted that high. But it seems like a New York Jet thing to do. It seems like that's something that they would definitely do. And it's something that they, know that they need to fix. And they need to get it right. And if you can have a guy like that learn under Tyrod Taylor and, sit for an entire year, you've got the future taken care of if he ends up panning out and ends up hitting. And that just seems like something the Jets would do.
I'll tell you what, because I have it different. I think I would take the edge rusher from Georgia, Michael Williams, because here's the deal. Hassan Reddick, I don't think he's going to be back. And you need to have a very good secondary edge rusher next to Jermaine Johnson when he's back for the entirety of the year. And it's not going to be easy when he comes back because of that injury. But I'm on the opposite. I think Michael Williams could be an interesting one, but that is interesting to think about. I could see that be a shocker in the NFL with them. Okay, This is the perfect spot because right now I already have my franchise quarterback in Caleb Williams. Now I just need to get the coach. And hopefully, if Ryan Foles gets this right, the offensive line was so disappointing this year. I'm going to take Will Campbell, the best tackle in the country out of LSU, because it just makes perfect sense. Right now, they're so decimated on the offensive line, and it didn't look like it didn't even pick up where it left off of last year, which was so disappointing. And I need to protect Caleb Williams. I also need to develop an offensive line that can open up a run game. And if I don't have that, Chicago would be in trouble. I don't have a problem with their defense, but I just think if you're going to adjust this offense and get better at it, fix that offensive line pronto. Will Campbell makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, it definitely does. I like that pick a lot. And here's where it gets very, very tricky for the New Orleans Saints. Very tricky. Just because, they've got so many pieces that they need filled on their roster, quarterback included. And they've got no money to spend, damn near. So this is tough. I go back and forth with the Saints all the time between defense and offense because you don't really have, outside of Cam Jordan, and he's more than likely going to be gone within the next year or two. Yeah. You don't really have anybody on that defensive line other than probably Byron Murphy that they got that really screams, wow, or like, oh my gosh. But and I'm going to pick this guy, and I'll explain why. I'm going to go with Luther Burden right here with the Saints.
Another receiver. Wow.
And the reason why is because you look at that offense, and Rashid Shaheed is going to be back next year. Chris Olave had his 4th concussion this year, and you don't know what the status of his playing ability is going to be over the next couple years. And he got shut down for the rest of the season. If something happens to Chris Olave and he can't play football anymore, or he gets severely hurt, you don't have that other option in the Saints. And I know that they need defensive help. I get that. I understand more than anything. But if they can somehow scrape together some money and everything, a lot of these pieces that are available this offseason, even if they just get one, Charvarius Ward, DeMarcus Lawrence, Khalil Mack, Hassan Reddick, Carlton Davis, DJ Reed, Justin Reed, BJ Hill, a lot of these defensive pieces available in free agency, the Saints can somehow pull that off. I think it'll be good. I think Luther Burden's a great pick.
So this is also another one opposite, just like I mentioned about, the New York Jets, is I think because they are in such cap hell that, and you know what, this roster is old, and it's old on defense. So my thing is, I think they kind of do with what a Buffalo did, or what a, like what a Tampa did. They got rid of a lot of these old contracts and they went younger. So like I mentioned about the Jets getting Michael Williams, I think the Saints would get James Pierce out of Tennessee, because it just makes a lot of sense of it, because, Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, you lost your edge rusher years ago when Trey Hendrickson went to the Bengals. So to me, I think James Pierce makes it more interesting, and that's why I think the defensive help is really something that they'll need. They've already traded away Marshawn Lattimore, so I don't feel like their corners is a problem, because Kool-Aid McKinstry and the other young rookie they got is actually pretty damn good. They're very, very good. So give it a few more years for this thing to cook. Eventually, because I would have thought that if it came down to Tyrann Mathieu, I would have maybe taken Malachi Starks, possibly, but they're not that needy, at least in the secondary just yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you. Like, defense and offense, I've been going back and forth with the Saints. I've mainly, like, every time I've done a mock draft, I've chosen defense, and I completely understand where you are coming from in terms of, picking the defense. And I agree. But at the end of the day, the way that the NFL draft plays out, you always have that one wow pick. Nobody expected Jahmyr Gibbs to be picked 12th overall by the Lions. Nobody expected Bijan Robinson to be picked 8th by the Falcons. And nobody sure as hell did not expect Michael Penix Jr. to be picked 9th by the Atlanta Falcons as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you have some shockers of the draft that people are just like, why did they do that? Why did they pick that person? It ends up panning out for them in the long run. But this is a toss-up between the Jets and the Saints on what they could do.
Yeah, it does. And the way that we saw it is all 8, all from 1 through 8 were the obvious picks. They were the obvious ones. Now, the 2 shockers, well, one made sense with James Pierce, but the shocker was Jalen Milroe. So that's the part, I think, what will be interesting for the Jets moving forward. I do believe they need a much more competent quarterback. I do agree with that wholeheartedly. Now, they do have a bridge with Tyrod Taylor. But I just think, to me, if Hassan Reddick leaves, I'm gonna take that edge rusher from Georgia. I just would, because at that point, I don't want to take this defense for granted. It is way too talented. And the other thing is, DJ Reed is going to expect a contract, right? So I don't think they may retain him. But you got to get Sauce Gardner back to where he once was. You got Jermaine Johnson coming back from injury. The other thing is you got Quinnen Williams, and you have a defensive front that I don't want to take for granted. And if you get a defensive guy, and here's an interesting part. Let's say they get Brian Flores. That's an A+ because the defense is not going to be wasted. So, and what's going to happen is that you're going to need a trustworthy quarterback to move your offensive pieces, which is also very good. And here's the other thing. Remember Olu Fashanu, I told you, was one of my top 10 draftees from this draft? How good is he looking at tackle? That
Very
was
good.
really good. So that's why I said I think Olu Fashanu made so much sense because Mekhi Becton didn't pan out. And now
He's going to move over to left tackle once Tyron leaves next year.
Exactly. And so that's the thing. Him, Elijah Vera-Tucker, they got some pretty good guys there in that front. And maybe they could go and upgrade it a little more. But it's not bad. And I think at this point, when you get Breece Hall, you get Braylon Allen, I've got a very good run game, so I'm not worried about that. And the other thing is, I just think you have so much of a talented roster from top to bottom that all you need, and I saw that too when it came to Aaron Rodgers, he said he is taking some time off to really rethink his future unless he gets cut pretty early. And that's the part that I think if he does, I don't know where you kind of stand with Aaron Rodgers, but I just am like, you know what? I want to end the sellout with the Jets. It's not working. I need to have a competent organization because nobody wants to do any business with Woody Johnson. That's the honesty. But you've got to have the right GM, the right coach. I've said this before, and now I think because rumor buzzes is all around Brian Flores now. That's the new thing. So it's new information. Maybe I make a point, and instead of like I talked about with the Rex Ryan thing, because he's so familiar with New York, I think you can make a case for Ed Dodds and Brian Flores. I think that feels like an ideal thing there. And look, what it does is it gives you a refresh button. What you shouldn't have happened with Saleh being fired and Joe Douglas being fired. You now have a refresher. And Brian Flores looks happier than he's ever been. And I think that's because it's accountability. Now I think if you get him into an organization like the Jets, who need a guy that can refresh the team, I think it's pretty good. And like I said, you had a Micah Williams in that edge rushing room with Jermaine Johnson, and you've already got Michael Carter and with Sauce Gardner and a bunch of others. Now the question mark is on DJ Reed. I don't know if I see him back in a Jets uniform. I think
they could go for Greg Newsome since he is going to be cheap.
That's right.
Still on his rookie contract and everything. I can see him opposite of Sauce Gardner. And the reason why I chose Jalen, it's like I'm thinking of the way that the Falcons did, or the way that like another GM would. Because here's the thing. Jalen Milroe, I do not like as a quarterback. I think that he is a raw talent that needs to develop. However, if you can get him to sit one entire season and not play him at all, I think going into the following season, you can look at this guy as, I think he's got what it takes. Yeah. I think you roll the dice and you run with Tyrod Taylor. You have Jordan Travis as your backup, and then pick Jalen Milroe. You'll have a same situation that the Atlanta Falcons have with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix Jr. And now, if Jalen Milroe turns out to be that pick, you don't have to waste a pick the following year on a quarterback. And then you can go in and you've still got a young defense. You still got a young core. You still got a young offense with Braylon Allen and Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson and maybe even Devontae if he sticks around for one extra year. You've got – and Malachi Corley, and you've got the pieces that you need. It's just Jalen Milroe could be that missing piece, and I could see the Jets, the gears in their head turning. Like we've missed out on these other guys so many times. I'm not going to take the same mistake and miss out on a potential future franchise quarterback.
What's interesting about this, though, now that I think about it, is because you know what's funny? When I saw Tyrod Taylor come out of Virginia Tech, right, when he got drafted by Buffalo, he was a mobile quarterback who had an arm, he was accurate. The unfortunate part is that he had several injuries. What I feel like this is, if you add Jalen Milroe, who's an RPO quarterback, and honestly, I think if you fix up the accuracy issues, because it's a raw talent type, because sometimes it's like there's a bit of a hesitation. And you know what? I've seen this too with Jalen Hurts, because lately, Hurts is still a very good quarterback, but what I'm also hearing is when he looks for his options, there's a slight hesitation there to throw the football. I think if you coach out Jalen Milroe at the same time, because the problem with Jalen Milroe, he was so Ryan Williams reliant that he didn't find anybody on the receiving corps. That was the problem with Alabama. Now, I think with the Jets, because you do have Malachi Corley, you do have Garrett Wilson, you do possibly, I don't know if they might retain him, but Devontae Adams. So the thing about this is the correlation between Tyrod Taylor and Jalen Milroe would remind me a bit of a Lamar Jackson, Robert Griffin III thing. Because RG3 coming out of Baylor, he was a mobile quarterback who was just dominant with his legs, and he had a very accurate arm. But then once he got hurt, he was not the same quarterback. Mm-hmm. But he also mentored with Lamar Jackson. Okay, so he was a backup there. But what it did is it gave him key pointers. I think with Tyrod Taylor, he is a mobile quarterback and accurate that I could almost see a similar upbringing like this with Jalen Milroe. If you could coach him out of the hesitations with throws and work his development of decision-making, the time scale, I think Jalen Milroe might be better. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. But I will say, though, I think a lot of those, outside of the two, I think it just makes sense. I mean, Abdul Carter to Carolina is like, because they've lost Brian Burns. They don't have any other pass rusher that could complement next to Derek Brown. And yet you do have Shaq Thompson, the linebacker. So, I mean,
you still got J.C. Horn in the back end. So
yeah, you do. And I feel like they just need juice. And I think Abdul Carter makes all the sense in the world because, I mean, I'm watching Micah Parsons, and it's like, I think with Abdul Carter, now I do think Parsons is much more of a hybrid than Carter, but you do get a very solidified edge rusher that's going to give you some added juice for the Panthers. Because I think initially you don't want that defense standing out there for very long. You want to get the 3 and outs, you want to get to the quarterback, you want to stop the run, and eventually get Bryce Young out there to put some points on the board. I think it makes sense. The offensive tackle with Will Campbell with Chicago, you got to fix that offensive line. Caleb is just getting beat up, and a lot of that is because Chicago can't develop offense. So if a disappointing offensive line this year, and you add Will Campbell in the middle of that mix, that may be your saving grace to help Caleb in his sophomore year. I think he might be a lot better, and he'll have a better pocket. But you do got to figure out that run game. Now, I do think there's options there. There's Cam Scatabo. There's Amorian Hampton. Plenty of options. I can't wait till we do a whole full slate of all 32 picks.
Oh my gosh, I can't either. It's gonna be so great, and you know, I'm looking forward to how it's gonna be. And like going back to the Panthers, like Abdul Carter, and then with all the money that they've got to spend, I think they've got like $70 million that they can spend. Like, yeah. Looking at the defensive guys that are available, and like all of the people that they could even get, like, you know, Travarius Ward, pair him with J.C. Horn.
Yep.
Justin Reed, the safety out of Kansas City, put him in the back end. Yep. DeMarcus Lawrence, even if it's just for 1 year, pairing him with Abdul Carter and Derek Brown. You've got a lot of these guys that are available that I'm looking at, like linebacker Levante David is available this year, and Stephon Gilmore, he's up there in age, but still a very serviceable guy. There's a lot of pieces that I'm looking at on the defensive side of the ball that they could go spend some money on it and build that defense. Then they really got to question themselves, like, do we take offensive line to protect Bryce Young, or do we take an edge rusher?
Yes, because here's the thing. Offensive line for Carolina, I got Chuba Hubbard and I will have Jonathan Brooks, both of them healthy. So I will have a run game. I think you do take an offensive line, and I also do think you've got to help this receiving core with Xavier Legette. I mean, you've already traded away Deontay Johnson and got picks. So I think what the Carolina GM is relaying to David Tepper is he wants to rejuvenate this Carolina Panthers roster. So I think that's the deal. And you got money to spend. So either you go and maybe spend the money on a piece that you're okay to wait another year for. Makes sense.
I think what they should do is, don't mean to interrupt you, but here's what I've seen a lot of people do recently, and I like the way that they do this. If you have enough money to spend it on one side of the ball for the offseason, for like free agency, and then draft the other side of the ball that you need. Like if they were to go out,
that's what I'm saying,
and get like offensive line and wide receiver in free agency, then you spend the draft on drafting like Abdul Carter, Xavier Watts, and like a whole bunch of other pieces.
And that's what I'm saying. So ask yourself, what is one piece that I know can be a difference maker, either offense or defense? And what's the piece that I can go to free agency and I could wait for one more draft year until I have to readdress it? You know what I mean? And so like that's what I was getting at is you got to really evaluate what's the piece that I know I need a difference maker now, and then have one that you feel that is talented enough to hold on for at least one more draft year, and then I go and address that position. So there's a multitude of things I think Carolina could do, but they got to rejuvenate that roster. That's the one thing that's important. But they're not as. And what's funny is because of the rejuvenation, they are actually not as far than people think they are. I just think a lot of it is because, well, we know Dave Tepper's incompetent and he's impatient. But I think this GM, I think he's doing all the right things to ensure they rejuvenate that roster. Nothing's going to get in the way. Nothing's going to hopefully get in the way with that.
And if they do it right, like $70 million, that could give you 3 defensive pieces during the offseason in free agency if you spend the money correctly. That could give
maybe
you
1 year. Yeah. 1 year.
Or maybe one. Yeah, exactly. But like, if you really want to spend the offensive line, Ronnie Stanley and Kevin Zeitler are 2 big pieces you can put on that offensive line. Those are the 2 pieces that you need. Put them on the O-line. You're done. You got your left tackle. You got your guard. Now you got Robert Hunt that you picked up at center this past offseason. Now, if you want to go address a right tackle later on in the draft, now you got your offensive line taken care of. Go focus on defense. And like you said, I think that if they can hit on this draft and this free agency, there's a possibility they could be competing for that division next year.
Oh, yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I think Carolina, because New Orleans – they are in such a cap hell that I think it's only going to take them a few years to get right. Because right now, Tampa, and depending on if Michael Penix hits, Atlanta, and then Carolina, because I love their running back core. I like, hopefully Xavier Legette is a hit. But Bryce Young's not completely a bust. There's promise there. You just got to now build around it. And I think if you rejuvenate the defense, make it better to where you get the offense right. And hopefully Dave Canales, I hope he's the guy. Because again, there's not really a whole lot of pressure. But that is a team to keep your eye out on the draft, is the Carolina Panthers. They got a lot of things that I think kind of interest me.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I like Jadavian Sanders. I like that the one guy that nobody's really talking about is that Jalen Coker.
yeah,
I like him
Jalen
too.
Coker, yep, I watched him. He had some good flashes when they played the Broncos here. I liked it. So, yeah, interesting team there. All right, folks. Well, fun stuff. Bottom half of the hour with our Part 2 top 10 draft picks. We'll have our final one come the end of Week 18. And I think that's where we will have the finalization and have the clarity of who the top 10 teams and the top 10 picks before we get into the offseason with the entirety. And we've done 3 mock drafts this past draft. I did 3 of them. And man, when I tell you how close the accuracy was on a few of them, it's going to shock you. But I think this one will be really interesting. But for Chase and myself, appreciate all of you for coming on by. Enjoy the rest of the night. Tomorrow we may not have a show due to I'm going to be watching Thursday Night Football. Broncos Chargers. Hey, that thing's going to look really interesting. But we may possibly have a show come Friday. And, of course, we got to get back on the high horse with our prime predictions because it wasn't as great this past week, but we got to get better. So with Chase and myself, have a great night, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Snake Sports Talk Show. Take care, everyone.
Take care.